History. I wanted to start this story by saying that I was brought up in a very impoverished circumstances in the East End, speaking Yiddish as my mum lush, none of which is true. I was brought up in Hampstead Garden suburb, and I was so unconnected with the Jewish community that I did not realise that it was a Jewish area. I went to non-Jewish schools. I never went to any Jewish youth groups until I actually led one much later in my late 20s. I spoke no Hebrew. I didn't read Hebrew. And I was very low on the list of candidates for Aliyah. That was the background, and I certainly never visited Israel until my mid-20s. I then did visit Israel, and through a chance encounter on a bus ended up staying in somewhere for Shabbat that gave me an introduction, and the introduction was someone living in my street who was Shlomo and Lindy Levine. So it was a slightly strange story, and I then started to become interested in my Judaism and my Jewishness, and also in Israel, and maintained an interest and a desire to go to Israel, and went on Aliyah about 25 years ago, and had a very successful Aliyah it was about 98% successful. I had two aims. One was to find a wife, and the other one was to live in Israel. And I found a wife, so it was a 98% successful Aliyah. But I didn't find a job. So there will be a tendency for some of you to consider what I say this evening as me being very smug, because things at the moment, thank God, are working out rather nicely for our family in Israel. But I'm very familiar with the fact that it's not an easy step to make, and I've certainly done it once, and it didn't work out the way I had hoped. I came back from Israel. I should now talk about my professional history, because I'm then going to talk about the firm and then about Aliyah as a concept. Professionally, I studied history at Oxford. I then transferred to law and became a solicitor. I had a slightly interesting experience that I was accepted in a firm called Freshfields, which is one of the largest law firms in England, to do my training contract. And halfway between the 2-year gap between being accepted and commencing, I decided to become Dati, and I went to them and said that I'd like to now change my contract and leave early on Fridays. And after a bit of humming and hawing, they said, well, you can leave now. And that was the end of my training contract, which was a slightly difficult moment. The city is different today, and that wouldn't happen today in Freshfields or any of the other large city firms. It may be what some of the partners would think, but they certainly wouldn't do it. I trained, in fact, in a firm which doesn't exist by the same name, called Titmuss & Webb, is now called Deckert. And from there I transferred to, when I decided I wanted to do litigation, I transferred to Herbert Smith, which is probably the premier litigation firm in England. It certainly was then, and it probably still is today. And that's where I probably learned how to be a litigator, which is what I have been doing ever since. I took a slightly strange channel, became a legal aid lawyer for 5 years, where I was helping mainly homeless people. And then went to Aliyah, met my wife, trained and qualified as an Israeli lawyer, which you can do magically without any knowledge of Hebrew or any knowledge of Israeli law, provided you are 5 years qualified as an English lawyer or the lawyer of any country other than Israel. In fact, one friend of mine who is actually bilingual, you have to do a Hebrew exam. And if you've passed the Hebrew exam, which is essentially you need no Hebrew for, then you can do all the exams in English. And a friend of mine who is literally bilingual failed the Hebrew exam, which I passed. And she therefore just did all the exams in Hebrew and passed. To give you an idea of the level of my Hebrew when I became a lawyer, I rang up the examiners to find out if I passed, and they said Habayta, which means you've passed, but I didn't know what that meant. So I had to go and ask a friend. In England, when I returned to England after qualifying in Israel, within about 2 years of returning, became the head of the litigation department of a firm of lawyers called Bird & Bird, which is what today about number 15 in size in the UK, and has offices in about 20 countries. I opened some of those offices as global head of litigation, and and I was on the executive committee, and I'd reached a certain level as a solicitor, which was sort of more or less the level that I was likely to reach in my career. Unlike some alumni of this school who go on to become members of the bench, that wasn't a route that I was going to be taking. So, and I'd always wanted to live in Israel, and at that point we decided that when our kids reached a critical age, and the age was 12, that it would be too late after that to move, so we moved. And I set up a law firm of one person, which was a shock from having a rather large law firm that I've been about 3,000 people at the law firm I've been at my last couple of years. And I found out all sorts of strange things, such as I had to do my own research, and then I found out to do research you needed books. And then I found out that there's something called accounts, which lawyers do, which I knew there were 10 accountants in Bird & Bird, but I didn't know what they did. But it turns out you have to produce accounts for the Law Society. And every now and again I would get an email from the Law Society saying, we just closed you down last night for this or that or the other infraction, which I had to then get the rules out and work out that actually they were wrong and I could reopen the firm. My first ever application to court, the judge wrote on the application, it appears to me that since your office is not in England, therefore you cannot exist, and therefore the client is deemed to be representing themselves, which, if that had been correct, would have killed the entire concept of what I was doing. I looked at the rules, wrote back to the judge and asked him very politely if he could please set out the basis of his belief that was the case. And about 10 days later, quite a difficult 10 days for me, I got a letter back saying he accepts that the firm can exist. So there were lots of difficulties of a sort of regulatory nature along the way, but essentially we start, and the office started in a room which I rent, a windowless room which I rented at a price of 20% of my income, because I thought that's nil, which is quite a good rate. And the only expense that I had was I hired an office manager, because I had to have somebody in the office who could speak Hebrew to order pens and paper and things like that, which I couldn't do. The first piece of furniture we bought was a cardboard box in which my office manager's computer arrived, and we cut a hole in it for her legs, put it on the floor, and she sat on the floor and used it as a desk until we sent out our first bill and I felt we could afford a desk for her. So we started from fairly humble beginnings. Today, and I won't bore you with all of the details between there and today, but I'm just going to give you a brief glimpse of what the firm looks like today. If you walk into our offices, which are on the 32nd floor of the Azrieli building, probably one of the most prestigious office buildings in Tel Aviv, you're met by a very spacious sort of vestibule area, and through glass windows you look into a very large meeting room, probably about the size of this room, full of all sorts of grand equipment with screens that go up and down and windows that sweep back and forwards and electrically and so on. And through that, a glass wall the size of this, with a panoramic view of the whole of Tel Aviv. You can see from Jaffa all the way north up to beyond the end of Tel Aviv, and beyond that to the sea. It's a truly inspiring site, and from there's a sort of a lengthy curve of offices of about 20, at which sit about 20 lawyers and a few other auxiliary staff. And our client list includes, we've done some work for the State of Israel, we've done some work very recently for one of the largest state-owned companies. We've done work for 2, and I think now 3 of the sort of 10 Israeli oligarchs. We've worked for universities, we've worked for high net worth individuals, for a number of listed companies, and for a number of other people. We've also worked for 3 or 4 of the banks. One of the large banks in the country is our more or less permanent client. We do a large percentage of their UK property lending work. And we have a client list which is increasingly Israeli, but we've also acted for companies. Our first big case was acting for the largest bank in the Czech Republic in a $500 million claim against another European bank. We've done, this year, we were in the Supreme Court 3 times, which is, for a tiny little firm, is an astonishing number of times to be in the Supreme Court. We had 2 cases being run concurrently on a matter which we're still awaiting judgment, and the third matter, that was for an Israeli client, and against the UK government, and the third matter was a matter which was quite well publicised here, because it was solar panels, the government revenue for that, and we led the charge on a group of clients, of whom Friends of the Earth was one. And that remarkably went from an initial application for judicial review through to the Supreme Court in 3.5 months, which I suspect is a record that hasn't been beaten in English judicial history. It may have been, I'm not aware of it. And the same week that I was in the Court of Appeal on this Israeli matter, we had the government application for permission to appeal being thrown out by the Supreme Court on the solar panels, and we won that decision. Now, I'm giving these examples as obviously the sort of peak of the kind of work that we're doing, but you can get a feel from this that the firm is actually working at a high level in terms of the level of legal service and professional services that we're offering. And we've had approbations from our peers. I mean, I personally have remained listed as one of the leading individuals for litigation in London by the main directories. Actually, Legal 500 insists that I'm one of the top litigators in Israel, even though I don't speak the language and I've never been inside an Israeli court. So that's a slight, I think Legal 500 have it wrong, but it's quite nice to be in directories for both countries. But Chambers have continued to list me personally. Chambers International has got a list of the top 26 litigation law firms in the UK. We're in that list of 26 law firms, which, you know, is an approbation. We've won prizes for Innovative Firm of the Year. We came second in that. We came second in the Middle East Firm of the Year. One was the Law Society, one was Legal 500. But we're beating firms like Clifford Chance and Herbert Smith and Linklaters, and you know, the very largest firms are entering these competitions, and we are getting right up there and being recognised by our peers within the industry, notwithstanding where we're located. So the concept of having a apparently high-class, high-level professional firm in the wrong place works in Israel. Now, this is all possible for one particular reason, which is the quality of the people. And here I'm unabashed about being boastful, because the quality of the lawyers that we attract is quite astonishing. Now, I've been close to 30 years now employing lawyers, and I know at Bird & Bird the quality of the people that were coming through the door, and they frankly wouldn't get a job at Asserson law offices, because we've got, you know, if I go down the corridor, the first guy has got a double first from Cambridge and a scholarship to Harvard. The next person came with the top 0.25% in the whole of Australia. The one after that came third in the country in Canada. Was at the best university in Canada. The one after that got a double first at Oxford, not Cambridge, so I have to admit that that's a problem. But, you know, and so it goes on. I mean, I was at Oxford as well, so it's, I always think Cambridge is a better university. But with the fact that we're the only shop in town at the moment, any Israeli lawyer who wants to, any English lawyer, and I say English, it means empire. I mean, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, they can all effectively transfer, if they want to come and live in Israel, they don't want to learn Hebrew, they don't want to be in an Israeli culture, and they don't want to learn new law, they want to enjoy the traction of their experience already, they can come to join the firm, and that means we get high quality people, that means we can offer incredibly high quality service, so that when clients do decide to take a punt and think this very odd idea that let's use an English law firm in the wrong country, they turn out to get very good quality work. Mm-hmm. It's a vicious or a virtuous circle, but it's, thank God, has worked. Now, I want to end at the end with a little bit of aspirational concepts of what everyone in this room should potentially be thinking of in terms of their own Aliyah. modelled on this idea. All I'm saying here is that this idea works and is workable. I want to talk for a moment about the concept of Aliyah as we see it. Now, the Rambam says quite clearly that if you are in Israel, you can't leave. So don't go on holiday to Israel, because you can't leave. You shouldn't leave. Rav Kook holds the same, obviously holds the same view. He actually says that you don't need to keep 2 days Chag in Israel, because the only basis on which anyone would think of leaving Israel is if you're mad. And therefore, an insane person, obviously, their views of deciding to leave Israel don't count. So therefore, you can stay. You only keep 1 day. The Ramban was angry with the Rambam, for he said you weren't putting it strongly enough, and he criticizes him. I'm going to read a few words of the Ramban. Let's see if I can get this right. Nitztaveinu anachnu lavo ba'aretz v'likvosh hamedinot l'chshiv ba Shabbatenu. We have an obligation to go and conquer Israel and live there, all of us. He goes on, makes an even more extreme point. This is an obligation on all of the generations. שכל היוצא ממנו ודע בחוץ לארץ יאה בעיניך כעבוד עבודה זרה. Anybody who fails in this mitzvah of going to live in Israel should be viewed by the rest of us as being involved in avodah zarah. They are idolaters. Now, that's a fairly extreme view. It gets, in a way, better. Shenitztaveinu l'reshet ha'aretz v'lishvot bo mitzvah aseh l'dorot. This is a positive commandment for all of the generations. מתחייב כל יחיד ממנו ואפילו בזמן גלות. This is something which obliges every single one of us, and even during the years of the galut. Now, obviously there are different religious views as to whether or not we're still in the galut. Obviously, let's not get into that debate. But he was writing at a time when the land was run by Muslims, weren't massively hospitable to Jews. And he was saying, notwithstanding that, this is a positive obligation which you have to comply with. And once you're there, by the way, according to the Rambam, you can't leave. So there's a very strong tradition here which says that from a religious point of view, you really have to justify why you are still here. Now, in a day when the country is clearly hospitable to Jews, and it's clearly a place where you can go and live with relative ease, relative comfort, and relative safety, the question is a much stronger one. Why on earth are there any Jews knocking around the world that are not living in Israel? They should be, according to Jewish law. Now, I know that there are some people that take a different view, but there's no question, there's a very, very strong... The Rambam and the Ramban are not minnows in the halachic debate. I want to now answer my question, why you're not there. And I'm going to just give you a typical answer that I get, because we have floods of people coming through the house who don't live in Israel and are coming to visit, and they come for meals, and I ask them this question. And particularly all of my children's friends who are coming for a year in yeshiva or SEM. And the answer goes like this. Well, I'm in SEM or yeshiva or hachshara, I'm here for a year and I love it, and I really, really don't want to leave, and I'm going to ask my parents if I can stay. They're not very keen. They say that go to university, because it was very difficult to get into university and I had to work very hard for my A-levels, and when you've left university, then you can go. So towards the end of university, you can't do university in Israel because you don't speak Hebrew. So you go to university, and towards the end of university, you begin to realize how difficult it is to get a job. How much more difficult will it be if you are living in a country where you don't speak the language and don't know the culture and don't know the people. So you get a job, and you start getting a job, and you start to qualify, and you think, when I'm qualified as a then I can go, because I'll have a qualification. And so then you go and you qualify, and you think, you know what, it's going to be quite difficult to get my first post as a qualified because I don't speak the language, and I don't know the local rules, and I'm not qualified in that country, and so on. So then you think, what I need is a few years' experience, and I really have something to offer them. And when you've got a few years' experience, you think, and what I would really like, because it's going to be quite a difficult move, is I need a bit of money to save up so I've got a house. Because then at least I've got a house, and then I'll be okay. Now, somewhere along this route by now, you may have a spouse. That makes the problem squared, because your spouse's desire to live in Israel is unlikely to be as strong as yours. Could be. But if there's an inequality there, then you've got an anchor pulling you the other way. And once the spouse comes along, it's quite possible you'll find yourself with children. It can go the other way around, I know. But, you've then got children, and you start to think, well, now I've got a mortgage and children and a spouse to look after. I really need more money than I thought initially, so I'm going to work a bit harder and have a bit more money. And then you get to the point where your children are quite settled in school, and this one isn't so easy in school, and he's found exactly the right for him. And then I've actually had one of my wife's family say that the reason they wouldn't stay in Israel is because there are no good Jewish schools in Israel. So that was the most absurd argument that I've heard so far, but I'm sure there are others. Anyway, your kids are now at school. You get to the stage now where essentially you're waiting until your kids leave school, because then you're free to go. At that point, your parents are starting to get a little bit older, and you're not so sure it's reasonable to leave your parents. And then you suddenly find your children are getting married, and why should I leave my children, my grandchildren, to go and live in a country that I don't know? You don't go. And that's it. Goodbye. And that cycle is, every single step along that cycle is entirely reasonable. Every decision is right. All the reasoning is faultless, and you're right. But the net result is, where are you? You're here and not in Israel. I once met an electrician, and he told me that when you go to a building site, you touch a cable like this. Whenever you want to grab a cable, you do that. And I said, why? He said, because if it's live and you touch it like this, your hand will bounce off. If it's got a few thousand volts going through it and you touch it like that, your hand grips and it's death. I mean, you can't willingly undo your hand. He said he was once suspended in a trolley about 30 feet above a stage, and he grabbed what he thought was a rope, and it was a cable. He had 10,000 volts or something running through his body, and he knew that he had seconds to live. He did the only thing which he could do, which he was able to do, which is he threw himself off the trolley. And obviously the fall pulled his hand away from the cable. He survived the fall, otherwise I wouldn't have had this conversation with him. That's what we all have to do. That's the situation we're all in. I say we're in. Todala El, thank God, I'm not today in that situation. But I just threw myself off the trolley. And anybody who wants to actually go and live in Israel, and everybody ought to, from a halakhic point of view, has to do that. You're never going to find the right moment where it's comfortable to go. And you'll certainly, I come across people who apply for a job in the office, and they say, well, I just need to find a house and a job and a community I like and schools for my children and equal pay to what I'm getting here, and then I'm going to come. Well, forget it. No one is going to... that takes some time to develop. And if you're not prepared to throw yourself off the trolley, you are not ever going to let go of where you are now. If you have the aspiration, that's the only way to do it. And there isn't a right time. There'll never be a right time. I want to deal with the positives. Why should you want to go and live in Israel? And I'm not being paid by the ZF here. I'm just trying to... I was asked to talk about my Aliyah. The nuts and bolts of what I've done seem to me quite dull. The thinking behind it may be of some interest. And that's what I'm trying to deal with. I'm trying to look at the thinking behind it. I was brought up non-Dati and went to good schools, good university, and I came out thinking the world was my oyster. I could basically, more or less, go anywhere and do any job and do anything I wanted to do within English society. I became Dati, and suddenly I found that my horizons had shrunk broadly to Hendon and Golders Green. I agree we're not in Hendon or Golders Green here, but you understand what I'm talking about. And I thought, if my horizons are shrunk in this way, do I want to bring up children who live essentially in Hendon and Golders Green, and those are their horizons? No, I want to bring up children who feel the whole country is their oyster and they can go and do anything that's within their personal capabilities. In other words, I wanted not to be a minority. I didn't like being a minority, having had the enjoyment of being a majority, part of the majority. And there are thousands of little indignities as a Jew that one feels that one almost doesn't notice after living here long enough. You know, I told you the story about the gentleman on the tube that suggested I go on Aliyah. Jews go home, I think was the expression. Or Yids, maybe. I'd never been to Israel at the time, but that was... you know, I walked past someone on the tube today who was begging. You're wearing a kippah, you think not just, should I give him money, but what will the people around think the Jew not giving money? You're thinking of yourself as a minority. Someone comes around the office with a checkbook with a request for their personal charity. You don't think, do I support this charity? You're also thinking, what will this person think of the Jew, how much the Jew gives them to their charity? Should I be a bit more generous? Or, you know, what? You're thinking, you're consciously being reminded in one way or another, and I'm not talking about highly negative things, like some of the things I have heard and oversaid and said about me and to my face sometimes about Jews. I'm just saying, just the general minor pressures of being in a minority are things which I don't like, and I think that it's essentially uncomfortable. You get so used to it, you don't notice it. And falling off your shoulders when you're living as a part majority is a wonderfully liberating experience. I ask my children and my children's friends, their generation, I say most of them come from, their parents were not born in Israel. I've asked a lot of them, what is special to you about Israel? Why don't you want to go and live in another country? And all of them give more or less the same answer. They say, but this is ours. This is our place. In England, people can kick us out. Well, they're not going to kick us out. Of course, it's a wonderful country for Jews to live in. It's incredibly tolerant. But you don't walk around feeling this is where I belong. And in Israel, you do. And that's a very liberating feeling. The early Zionists, essentially, very broadly, two strands, political and religious. The political were saying, live in a majority country, have a Jewish country, and then we won't be discriminated against. We'll feel as though we have our own home. The religious saying that if you live in Israel, you lead a full Jewish life. All I can say is, for all of the problems and difficulties that clearly exist in Israel, they're both right. If you walk around in Israel, you are part of the majority. You belong. It is your country. And it's a very interesting fact. None of my Israeli clients, and my clients increasingly are getting Israelis as clients, none of them think that I am one of them, in the sense that I was born in Israel. They know from my accent the moment I speak that I'm an Oleh Hadash. But I don't feel any of the distance between me and them. They think of me as an Israeli, an Oleh Israeli, a new Israeli, whatever, but I'm an Israeli. They don't feel a distance. Whereas when I'm here in England, the moment that I am an Orthodox Jew to my clients, however English, whether we've been to the same schools, I'm different to them. I feel that gap. And that's, again, it's very, very liberating. So on the political field, and you know, forget going into politics in this country as a national politician, as an Orthodox Jew. I know that not all Jews have to be Orthodox. I'm saying obviously there are Jews in very senior positions in politics in this society. But the idea that you could go on to go into an election for Parliament as an Orthodox Jew in this country is, I think, more or less unthinkable outside of one or two constituencies where it's a positive. It's not the case in America, I accept. But it's in Israel, obviously, it's part of society. That's who you are. Religiously, I suddenly noticed I was preparing for Pesach, and think of Chagim on a Tuesday and Wednesday as a working person. Monday is a full working day. Tuesday afternoon, you've suddenly got to leave. You're going to be away for 2 days, and all your colleagues are going to carry on and have to take over whatever it is that you're dealing with. You come back Friday morning, exhausted from having been up all night dealing with all of your emails that were coming in on Tuesday and Wednesday when you weren't in Wednesday and Thursday when you weren't in the office. And by midday, you've got to leave again because it's Friday and it's Shabbos. And by the time you've had 3 weeks of that, you are frankly absolutely razzled. And it's the most exhausting, terrible, difficult experience. It's not uplifting. Compare that in Israel. The whole country is getting ready for Sukkot or Pesach. Whether they're from or not from, Dati, Chiloni, it doesn't matter. every radio program, every television program, the newspapers, the people you talk about, the people you meet, everyone is preparing in the same way. The whole office, everyone in the office is getting ready for whatever it is, and no one of your clients are expecting you to be around during Chol Hamoed. It's the first time in my life I realised what Chol Hamoed is. Chol Hamoed is not some horrible period where you're rushing to try and catch up with all the work you have missed and are about to miss. You're actually enjoying it, and you're experiencing the festivals the way you are. The whole country is run. It's difficult to envisage the extent to which this is the case without living there. But and a short visit, you don't get the feel in the same way. It took me some years for me to realise this. But you know, the Jewishness of the country is it seeps into every element of society. To give you an example, a totally non-dati person that I work with, who deals with PR, I sent an email saying, I'm not very happy with the way you do this, you should have said such and such, in future press releases please do this. The reply, Naseh v'nishma. A quote from the Chumash, because that's everyday language, that's the way people talk, think and act and respond. Everyone speaks Hebrew as their language. They quote from Chumash as the way we quote from Shakespeare or the King James Version of the Bible. That is their fundamental literature. They all have Shabbat as a special day. It may be a day on which they don't keep Shabbat al pi halacha, but they're keeping Shabbat as a different day. The festivals are the same. The whole rhythm of life is on the Jewish cycle. It's not on the Christian cycle as we have in this country. And it seeps into your every being. So one's religious experience, one's religious life is hugely enhanced in a way that is a drip feed method that it's difficult to feel instantly, but it's there. And above all, I studied history at university. I didn't study very much history at university, my tutors will tell me, but nominally I was studying history. And the main Jewish history is not being written in England, not even in London. It's in Israel. You know, you're on the sidelines here, and when this is not where it's happening. This is not where the party is. A non-Jewish friend of mine said that when she found living in Jerusalem a bit depressing on a Friday. She said it's like as if the whole city is having a party and she's not invited. And she came to us on Shabbat quite frequently. But that's the feeling that she gets. That's what everyone in the Galut should be feeling. They should be feeling the whole place is having a party and you're not invited. A paradigm of this. A very important member of the Jewish community, of the Anglo-Jewish community, Mick Davis, gave a talk recently, which was controversial, I know, because of what he said. I'm not going to talk about what he said. He gave a talk, he was invited, or however it's arranged, a Chaveret Knesset, a Na'vilf, invited him to give a talk in the Knesset itself to explain Anglo-Jewry to the Knesset. And there he was giving this talk. I didn't attend it myself. But the important point is, neither did anybody else. There was only one Chaver Knesset that was there, and that's the person who arranged it. And what does that tell you about the way, I mean, I'm not suggesting that it isn't an arrogant and improper response, and I'm not suggesting that the Galut generally, and England in particular, can't play an extremely important role, and you have very full and active and rewarding Jewish lives, and as a Jew living in England, anywhere in the Galut, is a very, very good experience. And also Jews in the Galut contribute hugely to Israel. I'm not suggesting in any way that's not the case. But what does it tell you that one of the most important players in Anglo-Jewry turns up to the Knesset, invited by a member of the Knesset, and the Knesset just no one turns up? That's not where the party's happening. It's as if you're on a luxury yacht of a friend of yours with 12 berths and a chef and 14 staff and whatever, and beautifully appointed. And along comes the largest passenger liner in the world with thousands of berths and hundreds of facilities. And someone says, there's room for you. get on. And you say, no, thanks, we're fine here. Now, you are fine here, but you've missed the main event. And that, more than anything else, I think, was for me and for my kids a reason for going. I want to end up with this. I said I'd promise some aspirational concept. What Asserson Law Offices has done, what we've achieved, I think, is shown that high quality services of professional nature can be delivered in Israel by people trained outside Israel. I think this is Israel is made up of people who had no choice. 90% of the Olim in Israel just didn't have a choice. They came from Arab countries, they came from Europe after the war, they come from Russia more recently, people who didn't have a choice. The percentage that come from the West that have a choice is very tiny. But they are actually the people who have the most to offer in many ways. They've got high educations, some of them have capital, they've got connections, they've got skills which are needed for Israeli industry to develop. And what's possible, and it's impossible in probably any other country, it's possible to actually build top-level professional service firms in Israel and provide those services to the world from that location. There's endless numbers of different types of work which high-level people can be doing, I believe, from England, from other countries. And I believe that is the challenge that's facing the Galut. I think that's the challenge which is facing all peoples that aren't yet, all the people from the West. That's the new top-level Aliyah which should be occurring. And really, my suggestion, if anything can be learned from the experience that we've had of Asserson Law Offices, I would say it's that it can be done, and there's no reason why any of you